The author. Oh, okay. Shara McCallum is from Jamaica. She's an author of 6 books published in the US and UK, and her poems appear widely in magazines and journals, translated into multiple languages. Barney Capildo has described No Rolling Stone as seemingly controlled words that surge with echoes, poems that keep double entry accounts, stripping the page, laddering like stockings. McCallum achieves an unhaunting, characters are realer than real, less imaginary than restoried, like the returning dead whom nothing will quench or unhunger. This work wants us to begin again. And with that said, I'm going to go straight into the question. So thank you for joining us again. So can you tell us a little bit about your background, Shara? So you were born in Jamaica to a Jamaican father, Venezuelan mother, but you emigrated to the US, I believe, age 9. Were there any motivations behind this? And do you still have a strong relationship with Jamaica? Do you return often?
First of all, hello, Mervyn. Hello, Annie. Yes, hello, everyone. Sai, I think we've actually met before as well. It's hard. People don't have their cameras on. And hello to everyone else here. Everyone, thank you so much. Hey, Sai, I thought so. We had crossed paths once. Just really great to be with all of you. Thanks for coming out. Maybe we can at some point hear also from who's in this room, since we're a small, intimate space. I'd love to know if people want to share who they are as well, beyond what I know. But to answer your question, that's a long history that would take up a lot of time. I'll try to be brief and say I was born in 72, and that decade, as all Jamaicans know, the period of slavery notwithstanding, was a pretty rough one in Jamaican history. So it's complicated reasons that people migrate, but largely my grandparents on both sides were quite, aspiring middle-class Jamaicans. My grandfather, my mother's mother's second husband, it's a little confusing, was Jamaican. My grandmother's first husband was Venezuelan. And so they migrated to Miami, as a number of Jamaicans did in that time period, largely in response to violence. There was more to it than that. In my own family, there was a kind of also rift going on, and the easiest way to explain it was my parents decided to become Rastas, and I was raised in 12 tribes, which was a rich experience as a child to have, but from my grandparents' perspective, was part of the reason for the breakdown that occurred in our family, and that they felt my parents were not really capable of taking care of us. I was a child, so a lot of what I reconstruct is different narratives that don't quite align, different histories, even personal histories. It's a long time interest of mine, where there are a lot of omissions and there are a lot of secrets. There are a lot of things that don't get spoken of. And in my family, the principal one I've come to think was my father's schizophrenia. So what was more likely driving my parents' inability to care for their children, I think had very little to do with Rasta. But that was an easier place for my grandparents, coming from their background, to kind of displace their worry for us as young children in that environment onto. And anybody, like, I know there's a lot of Jamaicans in this room. So, I was always really surprised when I was coming of age in Miami, when I would meet Americans who would say, "You were a Rasta? Like, that's so cool," And I don't have that same memory of being thought of as cool when I was growing up in 12 tribes, actually. Hey, Winsome, nice to see you. Monica.
Hi.
Hi,
my friend. Yeah, wonderful to see you too.
So I think I'll stop there, because as I said, this could be like a long history discussion if we keep going.
No, thank you for that. So to follow that, your surname is McCallan, which is quite a traditional Scottish surname, which kind of doesn't make the choice of Robert Burns unsurprising in many ways. So can you talk a little bit about, I guess, your ancestors, and, you know, were they enslaved by Scottish planters? And whether you feel any connection to Scotland. Again, do you visit Scotland regularly?
Yeah. So, okay, so let me say this. This is part of the ancestry that may be helping to contextualize this most recent book. My father's father was a Black Jamaican. And I don't know a lot about the surname, but it's patrilineal, the surname I carry. But I have to put that out there to begin with, because when people see me, I like to joke with people. I have a mirror, I know what I look like. They're surprised that I identify as a Black Jamaican, as opposed to as a white Jamaican. I think a lot of that has to do with the history of migration, in my case, which is that I came of age in the United States, in which having a Black father, even a light-skinned, mixed race Black father, automatically made me Black. And so my choices really were to continue to pass, and I refused that choice. That is a way to say what this has to do with this book is that all my life, when people have met me, they've often assumed, based on my surname and my appearance, my phenotype, that I am Scottish. And they'll ask me that. I think they also ask me that because I have a kind of in-between accent, if you will. It's not really American, even though when I'm speaking to Americans, it can become more that way. And I think it's not really what people expect a Jamaican to sound like either. And so they don't guess this, you know. I've said before, when I'm really cruel, I make people guess. And they say, what is that? Where are you from? And in all the years I've done that, like never one time has anybody guessed Jamaica, right? And so this is a long lead up to say, all my life I've lived in a body in which I'm read as something that I don't think is the fullness of who I am. All my life I've been aware of carrying ancestries that are irreconcilable and that have everything to do with the history of slavery. So this was nothing new that I've been dealing with. What was new was that in 2015, when I went to Scotland, and I again got asked the question, oh, are you here looking for your tartan? And I said, no, I'm actually a poet. I'm Jamaican. I'm here to give a reading, That's when I learned the story of Burns that led to this book. And I will say that it is like many things that writers experience, which is, when it happens, it feels all your life you were on a collision course with this subject. But I think I had really been hewing a little closer to home in terms of the histories that I was comfortable dealing with. So to answer your question again about Scotland, I'm not Scottish. I carry a Scottish surname and my history is imbricated in Scotland, absolutely. I have visited Scotland a lot. I love many things about Scotland, but I was interested in this story because of being Jamaican and the history of Scotland vis-a-vis Jamaica that often gets left out has everything to do with colonialism, slavery, and history as we tell it.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I believe Sherry said she's going to return. So that brings me to, I guess, your mother. Your mother's Venezuelan. Did she have any influence on your writing?
Yes, everybody I'm from has influence on my writing. I'm always writing, I think, for my immediate family, but ancestors as well. So absolutely. What I would say is that my mother's migration, I'm from a very matrilineal family, strong women on my mother's side who migrated. So both my mother and my grandmother were born in countries that they did not stay in after childhood, as I also did not, and were formed by those countries entirely. My mother's first language was Spanish. She's from Caracas. And my mom has often said, She moved to Jamaica around the age I moved to the US. And she said she feels she got caught between languages, right? So she's never felt like she can fully even express herself. So that's how I think my mom has influenced me, is she has been a soul searching, as I think she somehow imparted that to me as well. She also influenced me because she became a Rasta. She met my father, became a Rasta, and even after he died and we migrated to the US, she continues to be a Rasta. And so nobody would look at my mother and expect that either. And so I think that that's also an influence on me, watching somebody have to kind of make sense of themselves between cultures and claim cultures that people would not necessarily identify them with. I mean, more recently, her precarity as a Venezuelan in the United States has also influenced me. So I've been thinking about that a lot, that, when you migrate, you want to try to be where you're from and you want to try to belong on some level and feel safe. And this is true of immigrants everywhere. And you forget for a time, what precarious conditions led you to that migration in most cases, but also that you're not really in your home. And I say this because when Trump came to power, unfortunately, my mother was not an American citizen. And he put Venezuela on a list of 7 countries where people began to be deported who had lived in the country that we have lived in for 40 years. And my mom, we were worried. Luckily, very fortunately, I mean, we had the ability to pay for an immigration lawyer, but lots of families don't have that kind of resource. And so I thought about that all over again, like the things that had happened that led us to come to the United States, and then watching this now unfold again. It just makes you more aware, I think, of suffering of many other people that are worse than yours.
No, definitely. I think that has been kind of a central theme in the discussion that we just had. Yeah, which I guess I'll leave that to people's questions. But I guess I wanted to dabble in and ask you a little bit about when you began writing. Did you know from a young age that you wanted to become a poet? Did you read a lot of poetry from a young age? How did that come about?
Well, I mean, it's not just because Mervyn is here, but I will single Mervyn Morris out and say that he knows this because I've told him as many times as I can bring myself to say it without being too embarrassed. I met him when I was just starting as a writer and beginning to think of myself as a writer. And I was a graduate student at the University of Maryland. Merle Collins, a marvelous writer, Grenadian writer, came to read and had invited Mervyn, and I got to meet him at a dinner. And his kindness to me really made all the difference in some ways, because I had so much longing to be claimed by Jamaica, but I was so afraid of going back, actually. And this happens, I think, to a lot of people. The circumstances that led to my family leaving were so bad, really, the ruptures that occurred and how it happened, that my family didn't want to talk about it. We lived in Miami, and for 10 years, I never stepped foot in Jamaica. So by the time I'm now coming back, I'm in my early 20s. It's with carrying a lot of fear, and a fear as much of anything that I couldn't even articulate at first, which I've then since written about. Anything I'm afraid of, I write about, basically, which was to be not claimed by the place that I thought of as my home. So I don't think you can ever return. Your country doesn't stand still for you when you migrate. But I've done everything through poetry I can to go back to Jamaica. And poetry is the thing that has made me reconnect. And Mervyn is one of the reasons. His work, first and foremost. I was reading it in diaspora, not knowing any other Jamaicans. Lorna Goodison, Miss Lou was a huge influence on me. Louise Bennett, huge influence on me. I never got to meet her, but I did get to meet Lorna and Mervyn. So these people that you hear and meet first on the page, and then if they're the kind of gift of a human being that Mervyn Morris is, to be so kind to like a writer trying to be a writer, you know, that really changes you. It makes you feel like something is possible. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for kind of sharing your history. We actually discussed two poems in a little bit of depth. Story the First and Voyage, that Winsome so beautifully analyzed for us. History is a recurrent theme in your writing, and integral to your writing, I believe. You've mentioned briefly about Burns and kind of your relationship to Scotland, or lack thereof. How did you become so interested in, Burns? How did that come about? I know some, oh, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead, Rowan. Continue.
I know some of us shared, so Shari, for example, is from the States and she's Jamaican, and she said that in her schooling, she didn't know much about Burns. Whereas Winsome mentioned that she was taught about Burns. So, there's a, yeah.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it has to do with that fact, I mentioned there's so many reasons we write the books that we write and our connections to things. And I think honestly, a lot, again, I know probably every single person in this room is a writer. I only happen to know for sure some are. Whenever people ask us these questions, I fear that we make up stories because we just are storytellers. So it's like, let me take these details from my personal life and arrange a narrative now that sounds like I knew what I was doing all along. It's a lot of after the fact of having written that I can say, even things that are so obvious, like, okay, yes, I can see how Isabella might bear a striking resemblance to Shara. I can say that, but in the midst of writing, I think it's a bit like all of the history that you've carried is coming in all together. So Burns is one of those histories that I carried as a reader. And like Winsome, I was introduced to the British Romantics. My first love of poetry were these dead British men, actually, in all honesty. People are like shocked somehow. And I'm like, that's who I was exposed to. That's who I heard. That's who I gravitated toward. And it's my age that's doing that partly. You know what I mean? And just happenstance of what I first took a course in as a university undergraduate who was pre-med, right? Not thinking of being a poet at all. And I just thought, oh, the British Romantic poets, I think I'll take that course. That sounds like a great, fun elective, And it turned into an obsession. I think to say what Burns is to me in this book would take a long time, but many things strike me about it. This is my unfinished business and obsession, as I say in the author's note, with loving something as well, not just being troubled, of course, by racism, slavery, colonialism. Those are so obvious to me. It's also the vexation that comes out of loving the poetry and loving the words and the habitation that I found for myself as a young person. And so I have to say that's what is going on for me too, and I said this many times, why does nobody also assume that I might be Burns in the way that people are part of their characters? I'm like, I'm a poet. I think it's that. It's the need to sit inside of these discordant histories that have made me who I am, and I think make many of us who we are.
Yeah, that that was very insightful. I didn't imagine Burns as you. Isabella maybe was more obvious. Yeah. No, but thank you for that answer. So my penultimate question really is, I want to refer to Madwoman, your previous collection, which contains a lot of really interesting poems in patois. Yeah, which I always find interesting, maybe because of the discourse in the UK about kind of Creoles and writing in Creole and what have you. Do you believe that there is sort of a strong patois tradition within West Indian poetry or in the Jamaicas? And do you have any authors that sort of stand out to you?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, Louise Bennett. So had I not been exposed to her work as a young person growing up, and also had I not continued to hear patois inside my house. So I was in the United States very clearly, but I had the experience I think is common. I would walk out the door and I would walk into America. And then I'd walk inside the door and I'd walk back into Jamaica. And so not conscious of this, right? You just kind of do this. But my grandparents, my mother, my aunt, like the immediate family who were the people I was hearing telling stories, everybody who visited, we were surrounded by Jamaicans. And all Jamaicans, whatever your class position, if you will, or your education, slips into speaking patois as well as standard English. We're not talking about inflection of accent now. We're talking about moving between kinds of English and different syntaxes and different lexicon. So that was my upbringing. And I'm so grateful for that, because while I'm aware that, you know, my Jamaican English is not the same as somebody who's stayed, I continued to hear it for my whole life before I began to be a writer. And that was the thing, is that all of what came in for me was that product of what I'd heard, what I'd remembered, and everything I'd read and been exposed to. And so it wasn't necessarily conscious. It was just very natural to me. For my first book, I wrote in Jamaican English or patois, as well as standard English and everything in the range in between. And this book is not that. This book actually used the resource of language that I learned and don't have in that same way, which is Scots. And anybody who's a Scots speaker and knows Burns will recognize that Scots is that other English or variant of English. It's a form of Middle English that's in this book. So it's an interest I have as a poet, loving ear, voice, sound of language, and thinking all of those are mine to use as a poet.
And I guess that leads me to my final question, which is a little bit obvious, but are you working on anything right now? Should we be expecting anything? Yeah, this is the part where I get to kind of, try and get you to drop a hint, or, you know.
I'm working on thinking about transitioning from the things I've been doing this year back to writing. I'm not the kind of writer who writes every day. There's usually, and this is customary for me, long periods of silence between things and projects and books that I finish. So what I'm working on right now is being present for the laureate work that I've been doing this year, which is very much a great kind of work, but it doesn't manifest in any publication. It's more serving the art of poetry and going into communities and giving readings and talks about poetry. And after that, I think I will work on prose again. I've written personal essays on and off for 20 years, and I think I would like to put them together in a collection at this point and see what I can do with that. But poetry, it's when I hear it, it comes. I don't know how else to put it. You know, I don't really write poems as deliberately as I think some other people do.
Okay. Thank you for that answer. Very honest answer. So now I'm gonna open up the floor to anyone who'd like to ask any questions. Annie Paul, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question? If not, we can ask Shara for you.
I'm seeing some in the chat, but I don't know, Rowan, do you want to read them out? And I can answer them just for the sake of the recording, maybe?
Yeah, so Annie Paul has said, hello, Shara. Thank you for your moving work. Both you and Safia Sinclair, another Jamaican poet, share Rasta heritage. Have you talked to her about this? Do you have a relationship? It's such a unique heritage to enjoy or withstand, as the case may be. Thank you, Annie.
Thank you, Annie. And Annie, I really am grateful for you being here and all the work you do, by the way. Just want to get to say that. Yeah, I know Safia. Safia and I talk fairly regularly. We met in the United States at a festival. We were both booked to read, and it was like we had always known each other and kept talking the whole time. There were other poets there. I think we were quite rude because we just only wanted to talk to each other. And I think it's because of what you've identified. We share a common experience in some ways. Her experience, though, of Rasta is very different than mine. And I think one of those profound differences is our age difference. So really, I came of age in the 12 tribes of Israel, and that's its own kind of Rasta belief. I was of the group of Rastas who were actively trying to go back to Africa. I mean, my mother was like, and father were saving money and putting money in a dues book for each of us every week. Our numbers actually were called to go. My mother has told me this. And she said because of my father's health was why she passed. So I've come to think I was never meant to stay in Jamaica somehow. I was gonna either go to Ethiopia or the United States. I would have been different either way, but I was apparently never meant to stay there my past 9. I love Sophia's work. I really admire the younger generation, and I love having that connection. I think it's so important to have continuity across generations and conversations. And so I very much value the similarities that brought us together, but the differences that we also come to see and respect. I think Sophia's road with Rasta has been a bit harder than mine in some ways. And I really look forward to her memoir. I would love to meet Deborah. I'm seeing a note in the chat. Anybody who's ever grown up in 12 tribes, I'm so eager to talk to, because, you know, I had that disconnection after leaving for a long time. So I lost touch. Now, what else can I say? Cannibal's an amazing book. All of you might know that already.
I believe Kim has a question. Thank you for your question, Kim. She says, hello, Shara. I'm finding I need to negotiate feelings of inadequacy in telling stories set in the past, in different landscapes and in the voices of people different from me, despite research. It's hard to be confident. How do you manage this? Do you find this is also an issue?
Thank you for that question, Kim. Could I ask a follow-up just so I can be more specific in my answer? And I'm just turning off my ringer. I'm sorry about that. What research have you tried so far so that I can know what you've done and not repeat things?
I've looked at archives and personal letters and records, and I've, you know, when I'm looking at different landscapes, I can't actually visit them, not always. So I'm walking them if I can, but I'm using first-hand experiences of other people as much as I can. So interviewing people, and I'm asking scholars where I can as well.
Yeah, I think I will echo a lot of what you've already done then and say it took me about 3 years before having felt I knew enough or had the courage. The research was maybe as much as anything else to give me the courage, because I was very afraid of this book, actually. And I mentioned I'm almost always afraid of everything I write about. So that is not new, but this had that layer of just being Jamaican does absolutely not make me an expert on, you know, 18th century plantations and how they were laid out. So I went to the archives to look at maps. I met with scholars. I did a lot of reading, took a lot of note taking, rewalked areas that I thought, even in Jamaica, where I've spent a lot of time in Port Antonio, which is where the plantation is that Burns would have gone to. But to try to read the past on the present is always an act of imagination. And so what I was really doing, I think, with that research was giving myself the resources to feel I could make that leap. And I had to do it in Scotland, of course. That was very obvious to me. I learned how to read Scots. You know, I just did as much learning as I could, but if it gives you any, I don't know how long you've been spending at this. So then maybe since you're doing all the things I would have recommended, I will just say 3 years, Kim, before I wrote the book of doing that. I'm a patient person, so when it comes to my own writing. Everything else, I'm not patient at all. So I hope wherever you are in the project, it will take root and you will find the voices. For me, it's always finding the voices that bring me there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Winsome, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. Hi again, Shara.
Hi, Winsome.
Okay, I have been doing a lot of work on your poetry, but in particular, I've identified an ongoing search for identity in your collection. I would say as a Rasta child, moving into teen years that you were forced to pass as white, moving into 20s, early 30s, where you were reclaiming your voice of your father. And in this current book, you have now taken a bold step, I would say, into facing the idea of being a mulatto. So although technically,
you're correct, yeah.
Right. So I just want to know if it was a conscious, or these things just evolved because of life and how life's journey took you. So,
well, first of all, Winsome, thank you for that really astute you've given clarity really to things that I've been working on, but I don't know that I could have put it together as beautifully as you just did. So thank you for that incisive question and comment. I want to give a shout out, by the way, to Winsome, whose recent book, Zion Roses, is longlisted for the Bocas Prize, just to say. Congratulations to Winsome. That's an awesome book and so much deserved. And the project you're working on, I know, is your scholarly work right now. So just to give you, I don't know, props for that. I've been there. So it's a long journey. But to answer your question, I learned the tragic mulatta is what I've been afraid of. I'll be very specific. I never wanted to be, I never wanted to just feel sad. I didn't want to also have to kill myself. And apparently mulattoes don't get to exist because they're born with multiple worlds that are not habitable. They're supposed to just die in every story. You notice that Isabella does not die, okay?
Yes.
So I think I was fearful of that, of only being seen as a victim and as an outsider only. And I also don't really like the way that she's a trope that for the longest time was used to make mainly white people feel bad for Black people. So I don't really like exoticizing myself. I'm acutely conscious of the fact that I don't experience discrimination like family members do who can't pass. So I didn't really want to write from the position of something that could be misheard as like poor her, you know? I think I was really afraid of that for that reason, very specifically, Winsome. But then I realized that is who I am too, you know? And I needed to reclaim her story. And so that surprised me about this book, because I honestly never thought I was going to write the second half of this book. When I started to think, and Kim, this is for you to think too, maybe you have an idea about what you're going to do. I thought the whole time the book would be the first half of this book. And of course, there were going to be women. There's going to always be. But I thought they would be, you know, Nancy, enslaved African woman, and maybe mixed race woman. But I didn't imagine I would do what I did, which is that I wrote this whole other story that had, you know, jumped in time, in geography. And it was like a geography I don't know at all, really. It's not mine at all. And it was because I needed to give Isabella a body and a story. And hers became the driving force for the book too, her story. So you're such a good reader, Winsome. I hope that if you have a follow-up, maybe I didn't answer it fully. But
No, you have. But one thing that interests me or intrigues me is that the white Jamaican, you didn't deal much with the if you had selected that could have been your alternate path, because a white Jamaican sees themselves as special as
Yeah.
against a victim.
And I think part of the reason is
Mhm.
that, you know, one of the difficulties I have with being identified as a white Jamaican is that, of course, when I go to Jamaica, that is exactly how I'm going to be read and seen.
Yeah.
I understand that, but I don't think of myself that way. That's the problem, is that migration changed me, right? So when I came back to Jamaica and I was like, what? I've spent all this time working through being mixed race, looking white, but being Black, feeling very clear finally about that, right? And now I go back and I'm told constantly, you're not who you say you are again. You know, and that is something I continue. That's one of the essays I've yet to write that will be in this collection. I need to grapple with that very directly because but it's not a lived experience, Winsome. So race is more than just, it's a complicated matrix. It's not just phenotype. It's not just DNA. I have 25 countries in my DNA. I'm not writing about, you know, all of them. It's ancestry, it's memory, and it's also lived experience. And I don't have the lived experience of a white Jamaican. I have the lived experience of a young kid in Jamaica who doesn't know that she's white. And then I have the experience of being mixed race and coming to terms with being Black. That is my truth. And that makes it difficult for people when they meet me. But that is what I've come to see about what you're asking, which is, and I saw it even early on because it's like, I think sometimes people think I'm trying to kind of get out of something, you know? And I'm like, no, I'm trying to fully inhabit all of it, actually. You know? There's no getting out of it.
I think that's exactly where you have arrived at too. But one thing I just want to say thank you for your beautiful spirit, because through your work I embraced Rasta talk and just your whole rhythms. I just thank you so much. You know, that was a gift from you to me. So thank you.
Thank you. And I know that you've done it and you've done it brilliantly too.
Thank you.
Your work, I love it. Yeah. Thank you, Winsome.
Thank you, Winsome. Excuse me. Are there any other questions?
I see a lot in the chat, but I've not been able to look at the chat. So I just want to make sure we didn't miss any.
I guess I have one question about writing style, considering your poetry is quite kind of trans-dialectical. In other words, it's mixed with, let's call it standard English, it's mixed with Jamaican patois, it's mixed with now Scots, yes, Scots English. Considering it's a mix of lots of different, let's call them dialects, how easy or difficult is it for you to engage in certain styles, poetry writing styles, particularly rhyming? You know, would rhyming be a poetry style that you would choose to avoid because you are mixing in so many different dialects? Would it therefore be too difficult to employ that style in your poetry?
That's a great question. What I'll say is that I'm very interested in rhyme, but in the way that it's more loosely understood as any echo of sound. The key is it has to be proximate for our ear to pick it up, right? So you can't have like blue in the first line of a poem and true in the 25th and call that a rhyme. But I think you can have blue and true in the first and second line and not position them at the end of each line, and our ear will still hear it. So I'm more interested in the kind of echo of sound and the relationship between sound and silence, actually, a lot in poetry. I'm really interested in voice and the inflection of speech, as it is also made elevated in a poem, because the poems aren't exactly how we speak. That's true even when you're writing in a range of Englishes, right? Even Burns wasn't writing in the kind of Scots that is spoken. He was creating something a bit literary, if you will. I don't have a better word for it, but like even the standard English we use is that kind of different elevation of our language. At least for me, I'm not going to make generalizations about all poets, because I think there are poets that are almost transcriptive in what they're doing with language. You know, there are poets that are working with strict meter, with rhyme, that is at the, you know, the stations of the cross, that we can line them up. I'm kind of more interested in the interplay between the kind of literary rendering of language and the spoken, the vocality of it, and something in between there. I hope that helps to answer it, but I do love rhyme. Yeah.
The great response. Thank you.
Thank you, Abe. Yeah, thank you all for your questions. This is the part where I put our poet in residence on the spot. Yeah, so Shara's going to read a couple of poems for us. Whenever you're ready, Shara.
I would like you to tell me which ones you want to hear.
I'm gonna put that to
Because you
everyone.
mentioned you spoke about a couple
Yeah.
of them. Are those the two that maybe I should choose?
So we spoke about Voyage and we spoke about Story the First. And I also played everyone No Ruined Stone. So yeah, maybe you could read them.
Sure. I'll start with, and I assume these are both, the Voyage is Isabella's. Yeah. Okay. Story the First. I think you all know this, but just for anybody who hasn't read the book, should I give a gloss at all, or should we
Sure,
just
yeah.
launch in? Okay, quick. I'll try to be brief. It's not my strong suit. I will say this is a book where the speaker of this book is Burns's granddaughter. She is a mulatta, a Black woman born into slavery who's passing for white, and has lived in Scotland for about 10 years. Her ancestry is complicated. Burns is one of her grandfathers, and her father is another Scotsman, the owner of the plantation. So this is the father she's referring to. The points of address in the poem is, as with many, to Burns, but then to all of us. Story the First. My father was an unexceptional man, ordinary, of his time, as is said in defense of men like him. My father, once possessed, perhaps, of virtue, grew fou and foul-tempered, his mind by avarice blunted and dulled. He saw everything for the taking and took. Your daughter, my mother, barely out of girlhood when he began with her, was no exception. In your time, you would have known him as a younger, maybe better man, not the mangled version I witnessed. My father was unexceptional in every measure but the one that mattered. His name was Douglas, and in Jamaica that made him laird. Fully of his time, he was all feared true of men born of colony. Wretchedness is fast imprinted on them, their souls shrunken by the whip, which seldom fails to destroy not only those forced to yield to it, but all who wield it. I think I've never read that poem aloud, so thank you for asking. It's always better when people say things, because then I get a chance to read something other than what I tend to fall back on. Voyage is Isabella's last poem that she speaks. For days our ship had listed in storms, but at last the waters stilled. In the middle of our crossing came a calm, and the sea, a sheet of glass, reflected only moon and stars and cloudless sky, as if all that was before and all that was to come was dream. Above and below us lay two firmaments, and we, marooned by history, by memory, became the between. In the wake of tempests, the sea offered faint reckoning, wave upon wave, dimly echoing, winds lashing of rope to mast. As that night splintered into every night, and the stars, numberless as the souls lost to the sea's depths, revealed the routes we would have to take to uncover, to recover the wreckage of ourselves. Thanks for asking for those.
Thank you for that wonderful reading. I think we've got time to squeeze in one more. Does anyone want to put forward?
No ruined stone.
Yes.
The last one, right, Winsome?
Yes, the last one.
Of course. So I always love to say that, you know, all the poems, even the ones in Isabella's voice, they are character, but the first and the last are absolutely me. So I'll just say that very plainly. And that's why they're demarcated as such. No ruined stone. When the dead return, they will come to you in dream, and in waking will be the bird, knocking against glass, seeking a way in, will masquerade as the wind, its voice made audible by the tongues of leaves, greedily lapping, as the waves' self-made fugue is a turning and returning. The dead will not then, nor ever again, desert you. Their unrest will be the coat cloaking you. The farther you journey from them, the more distance will maw in you. Time and place gulching when the dead return to demand accounting. Wanting and wanting and wanting everything you have to give, and nothing will quench or unhunger them as they take all you make as offering, then tell you to begin again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shara. Yeah, I guess we've unfortunately come to the end of our event. Oh, Winsome, yes, wanting and wanting and wanting. Kim says to begin again, that's all we can do. Thank you for the fruitful conversation, everyone, the discussion, the monologue, the dialogue, and thank you for being so kind and so willing to share, Shara. Yeah.
Thank you all for being here and listening. Rowan, for putting it together. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sai, for joining as always. Yeah, and I guess everyone have a fabulous weekend. Take care of yourselves. We'll be in touch with details for future events and discount codes.
Hi. So beautiful. Oh, I love it, Sai. Great to see your kids. I'm just making the presumption they're yours. You're not minding other people's children. They're beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you, Shari, as always. Shari's been a day oneer, book clubber. It's been lovely seeing the new faces, Kim, a quick plug, Zion Roses, Winsome's book. Hopefully I'll be in discussion with Winsome very soon. Yes. Abe, thank you so much for joining. Another frequent book lover. Thank you so much, Maritza. Yeah, I'm just gonna end it here. In true people tree form, when it comes to the end of an event, everyone kind of switches on and kind of chats a little bit, and then we all disappear. And I usually put some music on, but I don't have anything handy. But it's been lovely. It's been a lovely way to end the week. Yeah.
It really has been amazing being stimulated by all the subject matter that was that we went through, first with the discussion and then the discussion itself, obviously inspired by Shara's beautiful poetry on, and you know, everyone said it already, it's a difficult subject to broach, yet you did it so well. And it's inspiring, it's empowering, it's beautiful. And thank you, much appreciation.
Thank you. Can you tell me, if you guys have a moment, where you're coming from? And I know a little bit about Kim, that you're working on a book. I'd love to know what genre it's in, how far in you are. Anyone who wants to share, I'd love to hear more.
I want to know where I am. I'm in Dorset.
Okay.
I'm a poet, but I'm writing my first novel, which is a polyphonic narrative set in the early 1800s, and it's 3 women who live together. One is enslaved, one's a servant, and one's a mistress. But what's happening is I'm sort of wanting to write in other voices. So I've finished. I'm nearly at the end of it.
Okay.
But it's been a real challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it is, the project is always challenging on so many levels, right? There's the challenge of craft, which is, you know, it's sufficient, but there's the emotional challenge too. And I think sometimes that, as much as anything, to say Winsome scared me about writing this book. You know, you have to deal with some of the feelings that are going to come up, and you don't want to do yourself. I don't want to do myself violence as a writer. And yet you're writing about violence, writing about trauma. And so it's hard to find that. So I hope that you're coming to the end of it and feeling good about where you've landed. Please let me know when your book comes out. Just look me up. My email is easy. It's just shara.mccallum@gmail.com. So I'd love to know and get a copy, please. Yeah. You sound like you've written a proper novel. I wrote a fake novel. That's what I like to think. I call it a novel in verse because it tries to be like a novel, but then it's really poetry.
Mine slips into poetry. In fact, the enslaved girl in it, she's just a teenager, and her pieces are more poetic. They do slip into pure poetry, because in a way it's easier to explore that poetically for me, to explore where she is.
And Abe, where are you coming from, and what's your background as a writer or reader, both?
Is that not addressed to me? Who's that addressed to?
Oh, sorry. I thought, I didn't realize I was on mute. Yes, I have done some poetry in the past. I've had a few published in anthologies, including one that was published by Peepaw Press with Jacob Ross as the editor. But beyond that, I'm actually writing a memoir polemic called Stained Glass Eyes, Race, Multiculturalism and Understanding. I put a link to it in the chat box there, just outlining some of what it's about. And, you know, on the course of writing this memoir, which is about me, a Yoruba Nigerian person who spent part of my childhood in Scotland across primary and secondary school. You know, I basically experienced a lot of Scottish racism firsthand. Jamaica has, and throughout the Caribbean, and actually right across the Americas, people are dealing with the legacy of Scottish racism. Well, you know, my family had to deal with it in real time. And as far as I can see, it hasn't tempered at all in any way, shape, or form. So I thought not enough people know the truth about that reality. No one knows here in the UK that Scotland has the highest race-related murder rate in the entire country. Anytime I tell them that statistic, you know, people freak out. However, when I was 8 and 9 years old, my family experienced attempted murders against our family. You know, it was 8 years old where someone poured petrol for the letterbox and lit it aflame. And luckily the fire didn't spread, otherwise you wouldn't be talking to me today. So yeah, that's the welcome you get as an 8-year-old of Yoruba Nigerian in Scotland. Equally, when I was 9-year-old, my 14-year-old sister was walking down the street, minding her own business, coming back from school, when a grown adult man came at her with a knife and tried to stab her to death. You know, so yeah, murder capital of the UK when it comes to race is Scotland. Now, luckily, you know, I should say that she was fast enough to swerve out the way and run away. But we went to the police, we let them know what happened, and their attitude was basically, well, better luck next time, to the would-be child killer. Wow. Versus the people who we pay taxes so they protect us. All these types of stories is what I've put in my memoir polemic, because not enough people know about it. And I just feel when you were talking, I surprisingly went through a lot of the struggles of being honest about a life experience that you did, a life experience tempered with race in the same way that you did. So it was extremely inspiring to hear you share your own struggle of being fully honest about your experience, having to even research history to a certain extent to feel what what you were talking about when it comes to the subject matter of your poetry, of your book, of your work. I did the same thing. So, but I did the same thing in isolation. I just don't encounter many other writers who seem to be vocal about the struggle of bringing that truth to light. And that's what Toni Morrison insisted that we're doing. We have to write away from either the white gaze or the male gaze. We have to be true to our own stories. So I've read that quote from her, and now I've heard your testimony as well, and I feel reinvigorated and re-empowered. So Shara, thank you.
Great.
Thank you. And I make the same request that I did to Kim, which is keep me posted personally when your book comes out. And that's such an important work you're doing, because this is not a history people speak of often enough in Scotland. I never lived there, but I visited enough to know exactly what you're talking about. Just the absences that people are now beginning to grapple with some, but there needs to be a lot more perspectives offered in the historical record. Memoir is a great way to do that as well.
Thank you. And can I just double check your email was
shara.mccallum@gmail.com.
Perfect, lovely, thank you.
Yeah. And Maritza, I know you were involved with the promotion of this event, but I don't think we've met before.
Hi, yeah, it's nice to meet you. I think we've been CC'd in on some emails.
Yeah.
I'm working with PayPal as a social media intern, so do the Instagram and stuff.
Thanks for working on that for this event, by the way. Sorry I couldn't see your handiwork, but I trust you all did a great job.
You're very welcome. It's honestly just a delight to work with PayPal and all of the writers involved. I think just on a personal note, I'd want to take this chance to say thank you for being so honest and for sharing your experience as a mixed race person growing up and the struggles that go along with that, and not really knowing where your home is supposed to be because you're not really, like, for me at least, not really fitting into either kind of category. And it's just nice to hear. I like to think I'm a writer and I will really find my feet one day, but I don't really know where to start. with all that. So it is just good insight. Thank you.
Appreciate that feedback. And I have a couple of things. I'm a teacher, so I can't help myself. Here's how you write, Maritza. You read a lot, and then you write responsively, imitate, be inspired and instructed by what you read. I'm still doing the same thing. That's how I'm trying to be a writer still. It's not about number of books you've published. You do become more aware of techniques, and that's what we call craft, right? You know, but the struggle remains the same. When you say Winsome and others in here who are writers, Kim, Abe, Rowan, I mean, you're facing the same blank page every time, right? So reading for me is so inspiring, you know, to be part of a community of voices that Avi mentioned Toni Morrison, whose work is so important to, I'm sure, every one of us in this room. You see that kind of example, and it gives you inspiration and courage and motivation to keep going. So
I think, sorry to interrupt you, I think that's why people
ahead,
are
no.
such an incredible resource, just because growing up in England, I was surrounded by, you just don't get much diversity when I was growing up, and joining PPAL and just having this like wealth of people of color and people from different places and experience has been really something special, I think.
Lovely. Well, it's really been beautiful to be with all of you. I'm glad to get to know some of you more. Winsome, Mervyn, I'm hoping to come soon and see you in person. I don't know if you're still hanging in there and listening, but I just want you to know that. And Rowan, thank you again for organizing us. And this was really a gift to get to meet you all.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, so unfortunately I'm gonna have to end the meeting, but we'll be in touch and hopefully see all your lovely faces soon, and hopefully see you in the UK at some point, Shara.
Yeah, I hope so. Maybe this fall, Winsome. I'm hoping to come in the fall.
Yes,
Take you up on your brilliant offer and visit.
I definitely have to have you.
Yeah.
Bye.
To meet you, Maritza and Rowan in person. Everybody, take care.
Bye. Take care of yourselves. Bye
Thank
now.
you so much.
Bye.
Wonderful event. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.